Chapter 3: Being in God. Being in God is the fundamental tenet of Spinoza's thought. In the Ethics, this is presented as an ontological principle and also, it seems, as an ethical task. In Part 1, Of God, Spinoza states, "Whatever is in God, and nothing can be or be conceived without God." In Part 4, which focuses on the human condition and its empowerment or virtue, he writes that in proportion as we are affected with joy, we advance towards greater perfection and consequently participate more fully in the divine nature. Eo magis de natura divina participamus. Though this claim is on the face it purely descriptive, it is difficult to read the Ethics without regarding advancing towards greater perfection and participating more fully in the divine nature as a normative ideal. Chapters 4 and 5 in this book explore the idea that being in God is an ethical or spiritual task. Here we will consider being in God as an ontological principle. The first 5 words of ELP 15, quidquam est in Deo est, tell us something fundamental both about God and about everything that exists. God contains whatever is, and whatever is in God. It is worth pausing for a moment to take in this radical ontological claim. All being is qualified as being in God. I've named this phrase to emphasize that there is for Spinoza no being apart from God or prior to God, just as Heidegger's concept of in der Welt sein, being in the world, affirms that a human being is always already related to a world. According to Spinoza, the fundamental and immediate truth about anything that is, anything at all, is that it is in God. The preceding chapter showed how the geometrical order of the Ethics generates repetitions in the act of reading the text. When Spinoza cites an earlier claim in the course of a demonstration, the reader should recall or reread the cited proposition in order to discern the truth of the present proposition. Through the process of reading the Ethics, each proposition gains a degree of intensity, a degree of significance, according to how often it is cited by Spinoza and thus repeated by the reader. Those propositions that are most often reinforced are the philosophical equivalent of load-bearing columns in a building, since they are holding up the greatest portion of Spinoza's philosophical system. According to these principles of literary engineering, ELP 15 is the hardest working proposition of Ethics 1. It carries one of Spinoza's longest scholia and is cited throughout the text more frequently than any other element of Part 1, 8 times in Part 1, 7 times in Part 2, and twice each in Parts 4 and 5. Through this repetition, the principle of being in God acquires over the course of the Ethics a semantic density and correspondingly a psychological power in the mind of the reader. Moreover, this principle is inscribed into the foundation stones of Spinoza's metaphysics, his concepts of substance and mode. The first axiom of the Ethics states whatever is either in itself or in another. Spinoza defines substance as that which is in itself, in se est, while a mode is that which is in another, in alio est. Nothing exists besides substances and modes. Spinoza writes in the demonstration to ELP 15, citing axiom 1, since there is only one substance, namely God, see ELP 14, everything that is in God everything that is in God. This includes God. God is substance, therefore God is in se. But what does it mean to be in God? In 1945, Etienne Souriau observed that the meaning of the little word in is as it is found in the first axiom of the Ethics is the key to all Spinozism, and more recently Don Garrett suggested that being in is the most fundamental relation in Spinoza's metaphysics. It is safe to say that being in God does not mean spatial containment, nor does it mean being part of a whole. Rather, being in God is an ontological relation of dependency, which involves being caused by God and being conceived through God. For Spinoza, our being in God participates in God's own being in God. God as substance is caused by and conceived through itself. God's own being in God is a being in se, while our being in God is a being in alio. This is an ontological difference, and it secures the relation of profound metaphysical intimacy between God and finite things, an intimacy indicated by some of Spinoza's key concepts: expression, participation, immanence. So the little word, so the little word "in" plunges us into the deep end of Spinoza's metaphysics, since it is vital to the definitions of substance and mode, and of the relation between them, the relation of all things to God. Scholarly interpretations of the meaning and scope of the being in a relation not only differ, but lead to divergent interpretations of Spinoza's entire metaphysics. It is not surprising that even Spinoza's most accomplished readers struggle to make sense of being in God, or that his texts leave room for significant disagreement about what this means. One consequence of distinguishing between substance and mode, and insisting that substance is unique, that only God is substance, and that we cannot assume that our vocabulary, our grammar, and our concepts which structure or understanding of entities within the world can yield an adequate account of God. Being in God does not mean the same thing as being in my house, being in a good mood, being in trouble, or being in a relationship, nor do even pure metaphysical concepts of relations such as causation apply to God in the same way as they apply to objects of experience. Our language applies to what Spinoza calls modes and to the relation between modes. For this reason, Spinoza suggests that even to claim that there is only one substance, as he does in the Ethics, is strictly speaking to improperly apply to God the concept of oneness, which properly applies only to the kinds of things in the world that can be counted. In this respect, Spinoza's metaphysics departs from Descartes' metaphysics, which conceives human beings as finite substances and God as an infinite substance. Descartes recognized that our way of being a substance is very different from God's way of being a substance, so much so he argued that the term substance does not apply in the same sense to God and to other things, meaning that no clearly intelligible sense of the term is common to God and to created things. Yet treating these ways of being under a single category, substance, makes it possible to imagine the relations between God and the world to resemble relations between things in the world, since all these relations are relations between substances. This in turn paves the way for an anthropomorphic theology which conceives God's nature and action on the model of human nature and action. Spinoza's distinction between substance and modes powerfully resists this anthropomorphism. As we shall see in the chapters to follow, it is true that Spinoza often suggests that modes, and especially human beings, can possess, to some degree, characteristics that substance possesses absolutely, perhaps even to the extent that singular things are capable of becoming quasi-substances, as Don Garrett puts it. Nevertheless, the categorical distinction between substance and mode remains fundamental to Spinoza's metaphysics.